All here tonight. This is the first of our series of town halls where we'll be discussing or sharing with you information that will lead us into eventually the congregational vote on this disaffiliation issue. So a couple things to start with tonight, just what to expect tonight, what to expect just out of these town hall meetings. Each town hall is going to present different areas of information for the congregation to learn about the issues surrounding the question of disaffiliation from United Methodist Church. Not everything is going to be presented tonight. We just don't have that kind of time. So it is broken out in topics. Tonight is the history of how we got here, what's happened so far, and why we're even having this discussion. At some point, like I said, we do anticipate that the Church Council will present this issue to the congregation for congregational vote on whether or not to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. These town halls are meant to provide information only, not intended to present any opinion one way or the other. One thing of importance to note is that when we talk about congregational vote, that is for members of the church. So if you have not joined, if you're not a member, the vote will not be open for your input. If you want to join, there is a new members class that's going to be presented in September. I'm sure Bob is anticipating a very large crowd. Okay. No reaction. And then second, just doesn't really need to be said, but it's going to get said anyway. The Christian decorum expectations. Some of the issues that are going to be presented at these town halls are very emotional and very personal. We just ask that everybody be kind to each other, regardless of views on the issue. Also, these town halls are not a platform for debate. They're really here just for information. Some people are very well read on this topic, but there are a lot of our members that are not. And so what we wanted to do, what our goal is to inform as many of our congregation members as we can inform on the issues so that they can make informed decisions and vote their conscience when the time comes. Also, at the end of each town hall, there's going to be a question and answer session. Please be patient with us. And tonight it's just me. Not all information is available. This is an ever-changing, ever-evolving situation. And so please understand that sometimes the answer to your question may be, I don't know, or that information is not available. And with all that out of the way, we'll get started with our presentation tonight, which is how we got here. And it's the history of the United Methodist Church conflict. So to understand why we're having this discussion, we need to know what's happened in the past that even brought us here. So understanding the history of the United Methodist Church is important to understanding the current situation. And this is a history that has continually, had these ebbs and flows, and it's not been smooth and all of a sudden we had this big bump. That's not how our history has evolved. What we're seeing is not merely a conflict over human sexuality, but two different churches with different approaches to how theology and ministry that have merged together in 1968. They're now finally recognizing that their differences are not sustainable. All right, you guys had your coffee tonight, right? Here we go. Methodism pre-1968, pre-merger. 18th century, there were the Wesley, Asbury, and American Methodism movements, and the development of a German pietist brand of Methodist. So you have these different sects all calling themselves Methodism. In the 19th century, there was 1844, excuse me. There was a split in the Methodist Episcopal Church over issues of slavery, and the late century development of post-Enlightenment and liberal Protestantism. And then again, in the 20th century, there was a reunion, 1939, of that Methodist Episcopal Church, the ecumenical movement, and the desire to reconnect the divergent streams of Methodism brought them all back together. So you can see there's a long history here of separate opinions, coming together, trying to be together, separating together, things like that. So in 1968, there was a merger between the Methodist Church, which had about 10 million plus members, and the Evangelical United Brethren Church, which had about 750,000 members. These two churches came together to create the United Methodist Church. So from that point, 1968, there was a question about, between these two churches, what makes our coherent identity? What is the United Methodist Church? And there has been conflict in that question since. There are issues in doctrine and issues in moral standards that have been in existence since the beginning. There was a creation of a study commission in 1972 or in 1971 to present to the first post-merger general conference on these particular issues. But we all know about context. You have to know what's the context going on socially, not just, we don't just live in the bubble of the United Methodist Church, what's going on socially. This is 1968. We have the major cultural upheaval. There's Vietnam, student protests, the civil rights movement, sexual revolution, troubles in Ireland, and the assassination of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Cold War, Soviet Union takes over Czechoslovakia. You can see that it's not exactly the smoothest time in history. And then religiously speaking, there's the rise of the Protestant liberalism alongside an evangelical movement. So you look at Billy Graham versus Jesus people. The 1972 General Conference, it was not a new set of doctrinal standards, but an incorporation of both the Methodist and EUB standards side by side without change. So they basically took two sets of doctrine and just put them together. Their theological statement embraced pluralism, think big tent movement, open to many theological expressions and experimentation, big tent. So everybody's kind of diving under this one label. There was a development of caucus Methodism, interest groups defending their different aspects of their theological portion under that big tent. Albert Outler developed Wesleyan quadrilateral, which is the scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. And then the insertion at this general conference, there was the insertion into the Book of Discipline about the homosexual practices. So keep in mind the language in the Book of Discipline that we see right now was not inserted until 1972. So what effect does this have on us? The roots of the conflict obviously were present from the beginning. It's never been a smooth road for United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church looked more like big tent political party, holding together various constituencies rather than a church with core convictions and a common mission. So how do you maintain a church in which everyone disagrees with everyone else? The cultural wind is blowing against this big tent, and eventually, as winds do, tents don't hold up to the wind. So in 1988, there was a reassessment of the issues. There was adoption of new theological statement that expunged the theological pluralism and re-emphasized the Wesleyan heritage around the primacy of Scripture. Many continued to operate under the pluralistic vision, however, of the 1972 Book of Discipline, including most of the United Methodist seminaries and many bishops and clergy educated in those seminaries. Reaffirmation statement that the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Subsequent conferences added additional prohibition against same-sex marriage and ordination of practicing homosexuals. And yet the pluralistic vision caused many to reject these statements. Still with me? Nobody's sleeping yet. Okay, so late 20th century, so we're talking 1990s. conflict ramps up with the differing visions digging in on their particular issues. U.S. Methodism sees some regional differences, the caucuses that were developed, and the conflicts among the different caucuses over LGBTQ issues, abortion, and political issues. Most of our United Methodist Church boards and agencies and bishops lean a bit on the progressive side. And provisions of the Book of Discipline are not enforced in many segments of our church. And then there was the rise of even evangelical Methodism in the South. So our conflict continues and it comes to a head. The key question being, which vision prevails? Are we going to go mainline, institutional and pluralistic, or Methodist, evangelical, and doctrinally focused? General conferences at this time, from the late 20th century to present, have been focused on the conflict between these two visions, mainline, Methodist. Human sexuality is the presenting issue, but obviously the conflicts run much more deeply. So in 2004, Reverend Bill Hinson mentioned at the 2004 General Conference that the United Methodist Church is not sustainable. These conflicts among the UMC will eventually fracture, and separation is inevitable. It was widely rejected by the institutionally focused UMC folks that like that big tent, the pluralistic theology. And then affirmations of unity were made while continuing the battle internally. So with all of this conflict, why haven't we separated before now? Some of the things that make it difficult to disaffiliate or split, the trust clause is probably one of the biggest ones. The local church property, so the property we have here, the building, and all of the assets are held in trust by the annual conference. We don't own anything. Churches cannot simply leave the United Methodist Church without some kind of penalty or payment. Apportionments are, this is something that we give on an annual basis. They're required for connectional giving of a percentage of the church's income, and appointments make it difficulty as the clergy are appointed to churches by the bishops. This institutional connectional system has made it virtually impossible to stop the conflict, keeping both sides locked in conflict. So it came to a head in 2016, the resistance to the Book of Discipline with the progressive bishops, clergy, churches conducting same-sex weddings in protest of the Book of Discipline. Annual conferences began ordaining non-celibate gay clergy. There were provisions about to be passed by the traditional majority at the 2016 General Conference to strengthen the Book of Discipline's language and accountability concerning human sexuality. A coalition of large church pastors asked the Council of Bishops to lead the United Methodist Church out of this impasse. The Council of Bishops formed the Commission on a Way Forward, which is a 32-member panel from different constituencies, those different caucuses, to develop a plan to maintain the unity of the church in the midst of the conflict. The Council of Bishops called for a special general conference in 2019 to vote on plans put forward by the Commission on a Way Forward. So after this commission was, after the General Conference of 2016, then in May, the Western jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church elected Karen Oliveto, who is a married lesbian, as bishop in defiance of the Book of Discipline. She is subsequently assigned to the Rocky Mountain Conference of the United Methodist Church, which happens to be our annual conference. In October of 2016, a coalition of traditional United Methodists formed the Wesleyan Covenant Association, which seeks to either reform the current United Methodist Church, or if that's not possible, create their own traditional Methodist denomination separate from the current United Methodist Church. So we move forward to 2019 Special General Conference in St. Louis. The Commission on a Way Forward brought forth 3 plans presented at General Conference. The One Church Plan, which removed the language of the current Book of Discipline around the human sexuality, but continued to allow those who disagree to continue to hold their convictions. There was the Connectional Conference Plan, which divided the United Methodist Church into 2 or possibly 3 different conferences under a general UMC umbrella, and then the churches would align with their theological companions. And then the Traditional Plan was presented, which strengthened the current language in the United Methodist Church Book of Discipline around human sexuality, and it added accountability measures for bishops and clergy. So the results then of General Conference, the One Church Plan, which was preferred by bishops and the progressives, failed to make it through the preliminary votes. The Central Conference Plan generally garnered no support because it was complicated and it required constitutional amendments. The traditional plan passed by a slight majority. It was a 53-47% vote, so that's a very tight vote, including wide support from the African delegates. But accountability provisions were not passed due to time running out. My understanding is there was a monster truck rally that had to come in to the facility. Right? I'm not wrong, right? Yeah, okay. So they ran out of time. Monster trucks took precedence. Okay, so then post 2019 General Conference, we have this additional language in the Book of Discipline. We have these continuing conflict caucuses, and the results generally did not go well. The progressive annual conferences, bishops and others declared statements of non-compliance and resistance with the Book of Discipline and the provisions that were passed under the Traditional Plan. The institutional United Methodists who wanted the One Church Plan joined that resistance. So U.S. Annual Conference elects more progressive delegations to the regularly scheduled 2020 conference in hopes of overturning that Traditional Plan. There continued to be the angst and conflict over the passing of the Traditional Plan and causes different groups to begin seeking separation of the church and developing plans that that separation to be submitted at the 2020 General Conference. That wasn't me. So the Wesleyan Covenant Association develops a new book of doctrines and discipline for their potential new traditional Methodist denomination, and plans for separation were submitted by various caucus groups as legislation for the 2020 General Conference. The 2020 General Conference was canceled due to COVID. Shock, since we're all in the future. So one of the things you may have heard about that was being presented or was supposed to be presented at that 2020 General Conference is the Protocol for Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation. This was developed by Bishop John Yambasu and mediated by attorney Kenneth Feinberg. A lot of work went into this, 16 representatives from all of the UMC different caucuses groups. It would have provided a uniform exit route for any of the churches wishing to disaffiliate and to be able to join what is now called the Global Methodist Church. That is the traditional church that was set up by the Wesleyan Covenant Association. The postponement of the General Conference of 2020 to 2022, and then again, it was postponed to 2024, means there's been no vote on the protocol. So in 2019, in preparation for this 2020 General Conference, the Next Steps Task Force was created here at Tri-Lakes United Methodist Church. The intent was to provide information to the church council and to you, the congregation, on the current status and the issues that surround this possible disaffiliation. It's comprised of lay members of the church. We have met actually, so we have a few here tonight. I'm just to put faces with them, I'm going to ask the few that are here to stand up, please. So we have Mark Hatfield, Ted Bauman, Jay Kelly, Chris Williams. Thank you guys for coming. So our task force has met in 2019, leading up to 2020 before the shutdown, in preparation for this disaffiliation question. I think we had some discussions early on at the shutdown, and then it became clear the shutdown was going to be quite a bit longer. So we just kind of put the big pause button there. In April of 2022, prompted mostly by the announcement that General Conference of 2022 was going to be postponed to 2024, and questions that have rearisen, that's not even a word, but that has reemerged about this disaffiliation question, has prompted the task force to be unpaused. Unpause that button. So we collected some information, did the best we could, got what information was available to us to present to the church council onto whether we would present this issue of disaffiliation to church congregation for vote. That church council meeting was June 7th, and the result of that was not to seek disaffiliation at this time. Okay, that was the only statement made by council, is that the timing wasn't right for the church. Like I said in the beginning, I do expect at some point church council will be turning this over to the congregation. So for us, our duty now is to continue to inform our congregation until we get to that point of congregational vote. So what's our current situation? I don't know. You guys know? There are some churches that are already disaffiliating. In order to get out, the annual conferences are applying the existing disaffiliation process that is found in paragraph 2553 of the United Methodist Book of Discipline. However, each conference is applying that paragraph differently. Some bishops have made it easy for churches to disaffiliate, and others have applied significant penalties. There's no uniform exit strategy for churches wanting to disaffiliate, and litigation has begun in some conferences already. So what's next for the next steps? We will continue our series of town halls. We are planning on getting some more information brought to you by both representatives of the United Methodist Church, so you can ask your questions of them, and representatives from the Global Methodist Church, so you can ask your questions of them. So those are some town halls to look forward to in the future. We don't have dates for those yet, but just keep an eye out for that. Let's see. So Pastor Bob did do a One Flesh series. If you didn't participate in that in 2019, the videos are still available. I'm hoping we have links available on the next steps page yet. Maybe we will in the future. Okay. Okay. We'll have that available tonight. As well as some other resources as we find them that you may find interesting on the issue. We'll have it all under, we do have a page on the church's website for Next Steps Task Force. I believe it's a link in the top right-hand corner of the computer of the website. It's got footsteps leading up to it. Next steps. That's cute. That's cute, Sam. Current information from the Mountain Sky Conference for disaffiliation in 2023 has one confirmed annual conference date in June of 2023. So that would expect any vote from our congregation to disaffiliate in 2023 to occur by March of 2023 to get the paperwork done and the process started. There is a possibility of a second conference in October of 2023 that is still up in the air. We haven't gotten any confirmation on that from the annual conference. Like we said, if you have any questions, see our website for additional information and resources. And for now, so I'm going to open it to questions, but I just want to make clear that we are focusing on history tonight. So if you have questions about, because I went through that pretty quickly, and I'm not exactly an encyclopedia of United Methodist Church history. I'm sure you're shocked by that. So I will answer any questions you have as best as I can. And if I can't answer it, my history buff friend over here in the corner is probably able to answer your questions. But for those of you at home, my friend in the corner is Pastor Bob. So are there any questions? If you'd like to ask questions, the microphones are open down the aisles, or if there's any questions online. Sam, do you have any? No? History is exciting. No questions? Would you mind grabbing a mic so the people at home could hear you as well?
After the last meeting, when the council had basically a vote to go ahead and continue the process, but not to disaffiliate at that time, didn't the bishop for this group change the date for disaffiliation? Wasn't there a change that occurred immediately after we held our meeting?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay.
Is there any other questions? Thank you, Kevin.
So in the street.
Probably not. He's on yellow.
So you mentioned paragraph 2553 being applied differently or interpreted differently by different conferences. Is there a history of what the judicial branch has voiced an opinion, like a legal opinion on that particular aspect that you know of?
So the question being, if the judiciary branch of United Methodist Church has made any commentary on paragraph 2553?
As far as the standardization,
I'm gonna defer.
Green. The answer to that is that the Judicial Council confirmed 2553, including the provision in 2553 that annual conferences could add additional financial obligations as they saw fit. So essentially, the annual conferences now have, in addition to the provisions stated in 2553, the ability to add other provisions as they see fit. And many annual conferences have done so to varying degrees.
What was that question? So the question is, are they just picking things out of the sky just to add? I mean, maybe not out of the sky, but it is very discretionary on the annual conference what to choose as far as what hurdles they're going to put forth for any church that's wanting to disaffiliate. So one thing that we do know in our annual conference is there is this, you can vote to disaffiliate. I'm diving into issues that I said I was not going to dive into tonight, but you could vote to disaffiliate. They'll give you the numbers mostly, but then once you voted to disaffiliate, they would talk to you about property negotiation. So there's some question marks there, even within our own conference. And I really shouldn't have answered that. That really will be presented at a different town hall. Are there any other questions? Oh.
You said that you're pointing to the one church plan in the on the website that Pastor Bob had talked about in 2019.
The one flesh.
One, however, is that the same thing as the one church plan that had failed back in?
No. The one flesh was a 6-week, was it 4 weeks? A 4-week study on human sexuality that Bob did for our church specifically. So that class is on. The video of that class is on the next steps page. The one church plan that was put forth, if I go back and look at my notes, was one of the one of the, God, I can't find words tonight. One of the plans put forth for vote as, God, I'm just gonna find my notes. Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna sit here and struggle. You guys can just hang with me. Okay, so the one church plan, 3 plans. These were the plans that were brought forth by the commission on a way forward to general conference. And so the one church plan removed the language from the Book of Discipline around human sexuality. So very different from Pastor Bob's One Flesh series on, I mean, they both deal with human sexuality, but that's about it.
Answered this, but am I correct that we have no clarification of the property apportionment that would be due? It would be a negotiation. Is that correct? There's been no movement there?
There's been
from
no movement there.
conference?
Yeah, and we're hoping by the time we have the town hall to discuss the disaffiliation process, what that looks like, we will have more information based on, well, hopefully the annual conference gives us a little more information, but even if they don't, we'll be able to look at how they've treated churches who have already disaffiliated, because there are some that are disaffiliating and we're learning a little bit more as we go. And so hopefully by the time we do that, town hall will have that information for you. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Jen. Can you briefly mention what some of the theological issues are that the different caucuses disagree about within the church?
Again, we'll save that for, oh, we do have another town hall for that. We do. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. It is on our proposed list for town halls. So we will discuss that at a future town hall. Yes,
You did mention the Wesley Covenant Association.
yes.
They were gonna present a plan, but it didn't get presented because conference got shut off. Is their plan ever gonna get to be presented? And now that one's probably to Pastor Bob.
That probably is a better question for Pastor Baum.
Is
But
that
I would
plan
think that
ever
that's in
gonna
the
be
future. I don't,
presented?
that would be 2024, and I don't know that we have any plans yet for 2024.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Plan, this is so, they were gonna present it. And it got
Well, that was the
protocol.
protocol for
Mhm.
reconciliation and grace through separation. The WCA worked within that process. Subsequently, general conference was postponed twice. And we now believe that that plan is essentially dead because all of the progressive and centrist leaders published a statement saying they had withdrawn their support for it. So we believe that that will not, that has a very low likelihood of passage at General Conference 2024.
clarified. Their statement being said that but their statement being said that it was in response to the global methods. So it's back to global methods in response to getting that. We don't need to do that's what you had.
Sam's question was that these people withdrew because the Global Methodist Church launched. The Global Methodist Church launched on May 1st, primarily in response to the fact that General Conference had been delayed. And in the minds of many, that delay was going to lead to the death of the protocol. So I think the Global Methodist Church launched because a lot of churches were going to seek to disaffiliate and they needed a place to land. And so, the withdrawal of support, yes, is in response to the launch of the Global Methodist Church, but I think it's a
chicken and the egg question.
it is a chicken and egg question. Yes.
I don't know which one caused it, and we're never going to know, but I mean, our circumstances are what they are right now. Hi.
Hi. Okay, so I like tonight, and I think I'm just looking for maybe the 6th grade macro version of how, so like in my mind, I'm thinking we have the general conference, we have regional conferences, and then we have the Book of Discipline, which covers what we believe and the
Mhm.
rules we've chosen to follow, right?
Correct.
Since 1968, I think you said. Okay, and then there's a jurisdiction. Is that a committee? Is that a conference?
So we have an annual conference. So we have
The-
the general conference. That's everybody. That's international. That's everybody, right? And then you do have your regions, and then you have your annual conferences. So our annual conference covers four states. Yep. Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and Montana. Okay. So our annual conference covers all United Methodist churches in those four states. And each one of those annual conferences, so every annual conference has their own section of states where they cover their churches. And then each annual conference is the one that gets to set the rules for disaffiliation.
I'm wondering, how is it that, well, we're talking about the homosexuality thing tonight. What was that? 52-20? What-
2553.
Okay, so if we're talking about that and it's in the Book of Discipline, how is it that there's a vote, or how is the jurisdiction committee made? Like, who gets to decide how that changes? Like, I get that at the general conference, annual conference, they voted pro-traditional plan, and then that kind of didn't work out. But before then, like in 2016, if there's the rules in the Book of Discipline,
Mhm.
and then those were broken, is that a regional conference? Is that a jurisdiction committee that gets to make a choice on?
Well, so now we're talking about the enforcement of the Book of Discipline.
Okay, yeah, maybe that's the best way to ask my question. How does that work? What's the sixth grade version?
Sixth grade version of the enforcement of the Book of Discipline. Yeah, I'm gonna give it to you.
Okay. So general conference is the only body that can alter the Book of Discipline. Meets every 4 years, has 800 some delegates based on membership, clergy, so forth. It varies somewhat, but it's about 800 delegates, but it meets every 4 years. So the Book of Discipline is set by the General Conference. The jurisdictional conferences primarily elect bishops for a particular jurisdiction, and the annual conferences in that jurisdiction. That's their primary role. The other aspect, though, of the jurisdictional conferences is that the bishops in a particular jurisdiction are accountable to the other bishops in that particular jurisdiction, not to the general conference as a whole. Now, the general conference sets the law, but if there are charges brought against the bishop, they're handled by the College of Bishops in that particular jurisdiction. So the reason why the discipline is not enforced in some of these regions and some of these jurisdictions at annual conferences is because that particular College of Bishops refuses to uphold those charges because they've decided together they're just not going to do it. And so there's no mechanism by which the Judicial Council can say, yes, you have to enforce that. The General Conference could say, here's the rule. But the bishops in a particular jurisdiction essentially become a law unto themselves. It's part of the problem within our process is that there's no general accountability to the larger denomination by these bishops. No one can say to them, you have to do this. So for example, when Bishop Oliveto was elected in 2016, charges were immediately filed by people all across the United Methodist connection. Those charges have never been brought to trial because the Western Jurisdiction College of Bishops refuses to take them up. So what we have, I hope I'm not editorializing, but what we have is an ungovernable system. We now have, instead of a general connectional system, we have more of what the Episcopalians have, which is a diocesan system, where the bishops essentially become a law unto themselves in their particular region. That's not the way the Book of Discipline is set up, but that's the way it's practically being applied at the moment. The jurisdictional conference elects the bishops and appoints the bishops. Well, beyond that, our Western jurisdiction includes the Mountain Sky Conference, which is our conference, includes the California Pacific Conference, the California Nevada Conference, and the Pacific Northwest Conference. So the bishops of each of those conferences consist of the College of Bishops of the Western jurisdiction. So each annual conference every 4 years, jurisdictional conference usually follows general conference. Every 4 years, then that jurisdictional conference meets with the primary goal of each annual conference elects candidates for bishop, but it's the jurisdictional conference that elects bishops based on the openings in that particular jurisdiction. And then the second part of that is after the bishops are elected, then they're appointed to their particular episcopal areas. So we don't vote on our bishop. Bishop is assigned to us, just like you don't vote on who the pastor is, your pastor is assigned to you. Most of you don't know that, but that's how you got stuck with me.
Just a commentary, short, but I think it may be worthy of asking at least those present here if it would be helpful for an organizational structure. And I believe there were some slides that Pastor Bob presented early, well before the 2019 special general conference, that showed the judicial branch, the branches of the overall United Methodist Church. Anyway, that might be helpful to some of us.
We can definitely do that. Put that as a resource on the Next Steps website. That'd be a great idea. Thank you.
If I understand correctly, there were two financial questions that are still unknown to us. One is the church and the grounds, and we won't have a number on that until just before or after we vote.
After. Right now, the answer is after. After we vote to disaffiliate, then we would find out what that property number is.
And the second financial question was regarding the pension that has to be purchased, if I understand it correctly. Do we have any numbers on that?
We do. So we will present that information when we have the town hall on the process of disaffiliation, what that whole process looks like. But yeah, we were able to get numbers for that.
We have a question from home. And it's, you maybe addressed this, Jen, but when do you anticipate the next town hall meeting and what might it cover?
So we're hoping to have one a month. So for sure, timing is going to be sometime in August to have another town hall. As far as what the content is going to be, I'm still in communication with the UMC representative and the WCA representative. So we're not quite sure, are we going to have one of those speakers or are we going to present other information? I would expect it to be towards the end of August because the Next Steps Task Force has to meet again and figure that out.
All right. And another question from home. If a United Methodist Church disaffiliates, will they become affiliated with the Global Methodist Church?
That's a question for the congregation. And so that'll be another, that information, what that looks like. If the congregation decides to disaffiliate, where do we go is a topic for one of our town halls.
But Global Methodist Church is not necessarily like the default. There are other options that we would be able to choose.
Yeah, we do not have just one option. We have many.
And folks at home, you can also unmute yourselves and chime in now. You're allowed, I think.
Go ahead.
Again, the question is, we have to, on the church, we have to first disaffiliate before we'll know the number, that's kind of putting the horse before the cart. And so what happens if we're unable to come up with what they ask for?
I don't think we're required. So if we vote to disaffiliate and we get that property number, I don't think we're required to continue disaffiliation. All right, any other questions? Anything from home? Waiting for the voices to come over the speakers. In a church, that's really freaky. All right, well, I think that's going to wrap up tonight's town hall. I thank you all for coming. Yeah, go ahead. Wait, one more question. Don't take off yet.
When the church council voted themselves, and it was supposed to be a recommendation for how the congregation was supposed to vote.
No.
Right.
So church council was voting on whether to present the question of disaffiliation at that time.
Well, so then like, why was the word recommendation thrown out when they were talking about it?
The only thing we could do is to recommend the church to vote on. And am I saying that right?
Because
David's not
I,
even here to
like,
correct me.
personally, like I saw the church council voted however they voted,
Mhm.
and then that was their recommendation for the congregation when we voted. And then they took away the vote date. So there never was going to be a vote.
There,
Right,
yeah,
right.
there,
So did the
there
vote
will
date get
eventually
pushed
be
back? Was there ever a vote scheduled originally?
for the congregation, no. So the purpose of the church council is to pick an appropriate time to send the question to the congregation for vote. So one of the problems is the way the disaffiliation process was written by the annual conference was that church council has to recommend to the church to disaffiliate or not disaffiliate. That is not exactly how our church particularly runs. That's not how we use our council. Our council is used as a council, but we just don't, that's not how we.
So the
focus.
council's not necessarily recommending right now, they're just voting and then doing.
So
because, like,
what will happen
recommendation-
is church council will pick a time to present the issue to the congregation. Church council will not have the be all end all decision on
Right,
this.
But so like, if they were recommending with their vote to not disaffiliate at this time, then like in normal, like political views, that's them telling the church like, okay, we don't want to disaffiliate at this point, we're still gonna vote. So I just wonder how it's all going with all that.
I know. I just don't know how to explain it.
Well, so I'm just confused by the definition of recommendation.
So if I can,
Yeah, I'll just introduce Kevin William as a member of
we,
church council.
the charge to the church council, which we charge ourselves with, to evaluate the data that we had at that time on June 7th, I believe it was, and vote to either do nothing, which was the result, or the vote could have been to present to the congregation and then orchestrate a vote of the membership, as she described, to disaffiliate or not. So the vote of the church council that night was against recommending to the congregation to have a vote at this time, but that was driven by the dates and the timelines and the process that we had at that moment in time. Does that make sense?
But trust me, it's confusing for all of us. Not exactly the smoothest process I've ever been involved in. It's not done yet. Here we go. We're going on a ride.
Has any church in this Mountain Sky Conference voted to disaffiliate?
Yes.
Really? Have they?
Mhm. I can think of one in Colorado Springs that has already voted to disaffiliate.
They're be a good guinea pig, then you probably find out.
That's where we're
Quite a
getting a
bit.
lot of our information from, yes.
Okay.
I don't think it's a secret.
Well, I don't know which one you're referring to because
Stratmore.
Stratmore has not voted yet.
Oh, I thought they did.
No. Their vote is on August 14th,
Okay.
but the churches that are in the disaffiliation process right now have not been given their property negotiation numbers to this point.
All right. Any further questions? I promised myself I was going to keep it at an hour and I'm like really close. But I want to make sure I get all questions answered. If there are any more, I'm happy to answer any questions. I think there's a lull in the hail. I'm just hail. It was hailing there for a while. Did you hear it?
Good job.
Thank you, Ted.
And anyone at home, if we did miss a question, you can send those on. You can just send them to me, sam@tlumc.org. And I'll make sure they get on to Jen and next steps for answering. And we will also be posting a recording of this probably later this week for folks who couldn't make it. Thanks, everyone.